Chapter 13. Night's refreshing airs fanned the cheeks of Theon, and rustled the myrtle on his brow, but the subtle fever of love which swept through his veins, and throbbed in his heart and temples, was beyond their cooling influence. The noisy business of life had now given place in the streets to noisy merriment. The song and the dance sounded from the open portals, and the young votaries of Bacchus, in all the frenzy of the god, rushed from the evening banquet, to the haunts of midnight excess, while the trembling lover glided past to the stolen interview, shrinking even from the light of day's pale sister. Theon turned abruptly from the crowd, and sought instinctively a public walk, at this hour always private, where he had often mused on the mysteries of philosophy, and taxed his immature judgment to hold the balance between the doctrines of her contending schools. No thoughts so deep and high now filled his youthful fancy. He wandered on, his senses steeped in delirium not less potent than that of wine, until his steps were suddenly arrested by a somewhat shrewd encounter with a human figure, advancing with a pace more deliberate than his own. He started backwards and his eyes met those of Cleanthes. The Stoic paused a moment, then moved to pass on. But Theon, however little he might have desired such a companion at such a moment, hailed him by name, and placed himself at his side. Again Cleanthes gazed on him in silence, when Theon, following the direction of his glance, raised a hand to his temples, and removed, with a conscious blush, the offending garland. He held it for a moment, then, placing it in his bosom, "You misjudge this innocent token, a pledge of acknowledgment for a life redeemed from the waves. Would that I might receive a pledge of the redemption of thy virtue, Theon, from the flood of destruction. For thy sake I have opened the volumes of this smooth deceiver. And shall a few fair words and a fairer countenance shield such doctrines from opprobrium? Shall he who robs virtue of her sublimity, the gods of their power, man of his immortality, and creation of its providence, pass for a teacher of truth, and expounder of the laws of nature? Where is thy reason, Theon? Where thy moral sense? To see, in doctrines such as these, aught but impiety and crime, or to imagine that he, who advocates them, can merit aught but the scorn of the wise, and the opprobrium of the good. I know not such to be the doctrines of Epicurus, said the youth, and you will excuse my farther reply, until I shall have examined the philosophy you so bitterly, and apparently so justly condemn. The philosophy? Honor it not with a name. Nay, returned Theon with a smile. There are so many absurdities honored with that appellative, in Athens, that the compliment might pass unchallenged, although applied to one less worthy than, in my eyes, appears the sage of Gargantium. But, preventing the angry interruption of the Stoic, my slowness to judge and to censure offends your enthusiasm. The experience of 3 days has taught me this caution. My acquaintance, as yet, is rather with the philosopher than the philosophy. My prejudices at first were equally strong against both. Having discovered my error with respect to one, ought I not to read, listen, and examine, before I condemn the other? And, the rather, as all that I have heard in the garden has hitherto convinced my reason, and awakened my admiration and love. Permit me the question, said Cleanthes, stopping short, and fixing his piercing glance on the countenance of his companion. Honor ye the gods, and believe ye in a creating cause, and a superintending providence? Surely I do, said Theon. How, then, venerate ye the man who proclaims his doubt of both? So, in my hearing, has never the son of Neocles. But he has and does in the hearing of the world. I have so heard, and ranked it among the libels of his enemies. He has so written, and the fact is acknowledged by his friends. I will read his works, said Theon, and question the writer. A mind more candid, whatever be its errors, exists not, I'm persuaded, than that of Epicurus. I should have said also, a mind more free of errors. but he has taught me to think no mind, however wise, infallible. Call ye such doctrines errors? I should rather term them crimes. I object not to the word, said Theon. I will examine into this. The gods have ye in their keeping. Good night. They entered the city, and the friends divided. Chapter 14. Uneasy thoughts bred unquiet slumbers, and Theon rose from a restless couch, before the first blush of aurora tinged the forehead of the sky. He trod the paths of the garden, and waited with impatience, for the first time not unmixed with apprehension, the appearance of the master. The assertions of Cleanthes were corroborated by the testimony of the public, but that testimony he had learned to despise. They were made after perusal of Epicurus' writings. With these writings he was still unacquainted. Had they been misinterpreted? Cleanthes was no Timocrates. If prejudiced, he was incapable of willful misrepresentation, and he was too familiar with the science of philosophy, so grossly to misunderstand a reasoner, as lucid as appeared to be Epicurus. These musings were soon interrupted. The morning star still glowed in the kindling east, when he heard approaching footsteps, and turning from the shades upon a small open lawn where a crystal fountain flowed from the inverted urn of a recumbent naiad, he was greeted by the sage. "Oh no," exclaimed Theon half-audibly, as he gazed on the serene countenance before him, "this man is not an atheist. What thoughts are with you, my son, this morning?" said the philosopher, with kind solicitude. "I doubt your plunge annihilus disturbed your dreams. Did the image of a fair nymph, or of a river god flit round your couch, and drive sleep from your eyelids?" "I was in some danger from the first," said the youth, half smiling, half blushing, until a visitant of a different character, and one, I imagine, more wont to soothe than to disturb the mind, brought to my imagination a host of doubts and fears, which your presence alone has dispelled." "And who played the part of your incubus?" demanded the sage. "Even yourself, most benign and indulgent of men. Truly, I grieve to have acted so ill by thee, my son. It shall be well, however, if having inflicted the disease, I may be its physician. On leaving you, last night," said Theon, "I encountered Cleanthes. He came from the perusal of your writings, and brought charges against them which I was unprepared to answer. Let us hear them, my son. Perhaps, until you shall have perused them yourself, we may assist your difficulty. First, that they deny the existence of the gods. I see but one other assertion that could equal that in folly," said Epicurus. "I knew it," exclaimed Theon, triumphantly. "I knew it was impossible. But where will not prejudice lead men, when even the upright Cleanthes is capable of slander?" "He is utterly incapable of it," said the master, "and the inaccuracy, in this case, I rather suspect to rest with you than with him. To deny the existence of the gods would indeed be presumption in a philosopher, a presumption equaled only by that of him who should assert their existence." "How?" exclaimed the youth, with a countenance in which astonishment seemed to suspend every other expression. "As I never saw the gods, my son," calmly continued the sage, "I cannot assert their existence, and, that I never saw them, is no reason for my denying it. But do we believe nothing except that of which we have ocular demonstration? Nothing, at least, for which we have not the evidence of one or more of our senses, that is, when we believe on just grounds, which, I grant, taking men collectively, is very seldom. But where would this spirit lead us? To impiety, to atheism, to all, against which I felt confident in defending the character and philosophy of Epicurus. We will examine presently, my son, into the meaning of the terms you have employed. But as respects your defense of my philosophy, I am sorry that you presumed so much, where you knew so little. Let this serve for another caution against pronouncing before you examine, and asserting before you inquire. It is my usual custom, continued the master, with the youth who frequent my school, to defer the discussion of all important questions until they are naturally, in the course of events, suggested to their own minds. Their curiosity once excited, it is my endeavor, so far as in me lies, to satisfy it. When you first entered the garden your mind was unfit for the examination of the subject you have now started. It is no longer so, and we will therefore enter upon the inquiry, and pursue it in order. Forgive me if I express, if I acknowledge, said the youth, slightly recoiling from his instructor, some reluctance to enter on the discussion of truths, whose very discussion would seem to argue a doubt, and what then? That very doubt were a crime. It is there that I wish to lead you, and with the examination of this point we shall rest, until time and circumstances lead you to push the investigation farther. I have in me little of the spirit of proselytism. A mere abstract opinion, supposing it not to affect the conduct or disposition of him who holds it, would be in my eyes of very minor importance. And it is only in so far as I believe that all our opinions, however apparently removed from any practical consequences, do always more or less affect one or the other, our conduct or our dispositions, that I am at the pains to correct in my scholars, those which appear to me erroneous. I understand you to say, that to enter upon the discussion of certain opinions, which you consider as sacred truths, would appear to argue a doubt of those truths, and that a doubt would here constitute a crime. Now as I think such a belief inconsistent with candor and charity, two feelings, indispensable both for the enjoyment of happiness ourselves, and for its distribution to others, I shall challenge its investigation. If the doubt of any truth shall constitute a crime, then the belief of the same truth should constitute a virtue. Perhaps a duty would rather express it. When you charge the neglect of any duty as a crime, or account its fulfillment a virtue, you suppose the existence of a power to neglect or fulfill, and it is the exercise of this power, in the one way or the other, which constitutes the merit or demerit. Is it not so? Certainly. Does the human mind possess the power to believe or disbelieve, at pleasure, any truths whatsoever? I am not prepared to answer, but I think it does, since it possesses always the power of investigation. But, possibly, not the will to exercise the power. Take care lest I beat you with your own weapons. I thought this very investigation appeared to you a crime. Your logic is too subtle, said the youth, for my inexperience. Say rather, my reasoning too close. Did I bear you down with sounding words and weighty authorities, and confound your understanding with hair-drawn distinctions, you would be right to retreat from the battery. I have nothing to object to the fairness of your deductions, said Theon, but would not the doctrine be dangerous that should establish our inability to help our belief, and might we not stretch the principle, until we asserted our inability to help our actions? We might, and with reason. But we will not now traverse the ethical pons asinorum of necessity, the most simple and evident of moral truths, and the most darkened, tortured, and belabored by moral teachers. You inquire if the doctrine we have essayed to establish, be not dangerous. I reply, not, if it be true. Nothing is so dangerous as error, nothing so safe as truth. A dangerous truth would be a contradiction in terms, and an anomaly in things. But what is a truth? Said Theon. It is pertinently asked. A truth I consider to be an ascertained fact, which truth would be changed into an error, the moment the fact, on which it rested, was disproved. I see, then, no fixed basis for truth. It surely has the most fixed of all, the nature of things. And it is only an imperfect insight into that nature, which occasions all our erroneous conclusions, whether in physics or morals. But where, if we discard the gods, and their will, as engraven on our hearts, are our guides in the search after truth. Our senses and our faculties as developed in and by the exercise of our senses, are the only guides with which I am acquainted. And I do not see why, even admitting a belief in the gods, and in a superintending providence, the senses should not be viewed as the guides, provided by them, for our direction and instruction. But here is the evil attendant on an ungrounded belief, whatever be its nature. The moment we take one thing for granted, we take other things for granted. We are started in a wrong road, and it is seldom that we can gain the right one, until we have trodden back our steps to the starting place. I know but of one thing that a philosopher should take for granted, and that only because he is forced to it by an irresistible impulse of his nature, and because, without doing so, neither truth nor falsehood could exist for him. He must take for granted the evidence of his senses. In other words, he must believe in the existence of things, as they exist to his senses. I know of no other existence, and can therefore believe in no other, although, reasoning from analogy, I may imagine other existences to be. This, for instance, I do as respects the gods. I see around me, in the world I inhabit, an infinite variety in the arrangement of matter, a multitude of sentient beings, possessing different kinds, and varying grades of power and intelligence, from the worm that crawls in the dust, to the eagle that soars to the sun, and man who marks to the sun its course. It is possible, it is moreover probable, that, in the worlds which I see not, in the boundless infinitude and eternal duration of matter, beings may exist, of every countless variety, and varying grades of intelligence inferior and superior to our own, until we descend to a minimum, and rise to a maximum, to which the range of our observation affords no parallel, and of which our senses are inadequate to the conception. Thus far, my young friend, I believe in the gods, or in what you will of existences removed from the sphere of my knowledge. That you should believe, with positiveness, in one unseen existence or another, appears to me no crime, although it may appear to me unreasonable, and so, my doubt of the same should appear to you no moral offense, although you might account it erroneous. I fear to fatigue your attention, and will, therefore, dismiss, for the present, these abstruse subjects. But we shall both be amply repaid for their discussion, if this truth remain with you, that an opinion, right or wrong, can never constitute a moral offense, nor be in itself a moral obligation. It may be mistaken, it may involve an absurdity, or a contradiction. It is a truth, or it is an error, it can never be a crime or a virtue. Chapter 15. Theon remained transfixed to the same spot of earth on which the sage left him. A confused train of thoughts travelled through his brain, which his reason sought in vain to arrest, or to analyze. At one moment it seemed as if a ray of light had dawned upon his mind, opening to it a world of discovery as interesting as it was novel. Then suddenly he started as from the brink of a precipice, whose depths were concealed in darkness. Cleanthes then had justly expounded the doctrines of the garden. But did these doctrines involve the delinquency which he had hitherto supposed? Were they inconsistent with reason, and irreconcilable with virtue? If so, I shall be able to detect their fallacy, said the youth, pursuing his soliloquy aloud. It were a poor compliment to the truths I have hitherto worshipped, did I shrink from their investigation. And yet, to question the power of the gods, to question their very existence, to refuse the need of homage to that great first cause of all things, that speaks, and breathes, and shines resplendent throughout all animated nature. To dispute I know not what, of truths, as self-evident as they are sacred, which speak to our eyes and to our ears, to those very senses whose testimony alone is without appeal in the garden. Do you object to the testimony, young Corinthian? Said a voice, which Theon recognized as that of Metrodorus. You arrive opportunely, said Theon, that is, if you will listen to the questions of my doubting and embarrassed mind. Say rather, if I can answer them. I attribute to you the ability, said Theon, since I have heard you quoted as an able expounder of the philosophy of the garden. In the absence of our Zeno, said the scholar with a smile, I sometimes play the part of his Cleanthes. And though you may find me less eloquent than my brother of the porch, I will promise equal fidelity to the text of my original. But here is one, who can expound the doctrine in the letter and the spirit, and, with such an assistant, I should not fear to engage all the scholars and all the masters in Athens. Nay, boast rather of thy cause than of thy assistant, said Leontium, approaching, and playfully tapping the shoulder of Metrodorus, nor yet belie thy own talents, my brother. The Corinthian will smile at thy false modesty, when he shall have studied thy writings, and listened to thy logical discourses. I imagine, she continued, turning her placid gaze on the youth, that you have hitherto listened to more declamation than reasoning. I might also say, to more sophistry, seeing that you have walked and talked in the Lyceum. Say rather, walked and listened. In truth, and I believe it, she returned with a smile, and would that your good sense in this were more common, and that men would rest content with straining their ears, and forbear from submitting their understandings, or torturing those of their neighbors. It might seem strange, said Metrodorus, that the pedantry of Aristotle should find so many imitators, and his dark sayings so many believers, in a city, too, now graced and enlightened by the simple language and simple doctrines of an Epicurus. But the language of truth is too simple for inexperienced ears. We start in search of knowledge, like the demigods of old in search of adventure, prepared to encounter giants, to scale mountains, to pierce into Tartarian gulfs, and to carry off our prize from the grip of some dark enchanter, invulnerable to all save to charmed weapons and deity-gifted assailants. To find none of all these things, but, in their stead, a smooth road through a pleasant country, with a familiar guide to direct our curiosity, and point out the beauties of the landscape, disappoints us of all exploit and all notoriety, and our vanity turns but too often from the fair and open champaign, into error's dark labyrinths, where we mistake mystery for wisdom, pedantry for knowledge, and prejudice for virtue. I admit the truth of the metaphor, said Theon. But may we not simplify too much as well as too little? May we not push investigation beyond the limits assigned to human reason, and, with a boldness approaching to profanity, tear, without removing, the veil which enwraps the mysteries of creation from our scrutiny? Without challenging the meaning of the terms you have employed, said Metrodorus, I would observe, that there is little danger of our pushing investigation too far. Unhappily the limits prescribed to us by our few and imperfect senses must ever cramp the sphere of our observation, as compared to the boundless range of things, and that even when we shall have strained and improved our senses to the uttermost, we trace an effect to a cause, and that cause to another cause, and so on, till we hold some few links of a chain, whose extent like the charmed circle, is without beginning as without end. I apprehend the difficulties, observed Leontium, which embarrass the mind of our young friend. Like most aspirants after knowledge, he has a vague and incorrect idea of what he is pursuing, and still more, of what may be attained. In the schools you have hitherto frequented, she continued, addressing their youth, certain images of virtue, vice, truth, knowledge, are presented to the imagination, and these abstract qualities, or we may call them, figurative beings, are made at once the objects of speculation and adoration. A law is laid down, and the feelings and opinions of men are predicated upon it, a theory is built, and all animate and inanimate nature is made to speak in its support, an hypothesis is advanced, and all the mysteries of nature are treated as explained. You have heard of and studied various systems of philosophy, but real philosophy is opposed to all systems. Her whole business is observation, and the results of that observation constitute all her knowledge. She receives no truths, until she has tested them by experience. She advances no opinions, unsupported by the testimony of facts. She acknowledges no virtue, but that involved in beneficial actions, no vice, but that involved in actions hurtful to ourselves or to others. Above all, she advances no dogmas, is slow to assert what is, and calls nothing impossible. The science of philosophy is simply a science of observation, both as regards the world without us, and the world within, and, to advance in it, are requisite only sound senses, well-developed and exercised faculties, and a mind free of prejudice. The objects she has in view, as regards the external world, are, first, to see things as they are, and secondly, to examine their structure, to ascertain their properties, and to observe their relations one to the other. As respects the world within, or the philosophy of mind, she has in view, first, to examine our sensations, or the impressions of external things on our senses, which operation involves, and is involved in, the examination of those external things themselves. Secondly, to trace back to our sensations, the first development of all our faculties, and again, from these sensations, and the exercise of our different faculties is developed by them, to trace the gradual formation of our moral feelings, and of all our other emotions. Thirdly, to analyze all these our sensations, thoughts, and emotions, that is, to examine the qualities of our own internal, sentient matter, with the same, and yet more, closeness of scrutiny, than we have applied to the examination of the matter that is without us. Finally, to investigate the justness of our moral feelings, and to weigh the merit and demerit of human actions, which is, in other words, to judge of their tendency to produce good or evil, to excite pleasurable or painful feelings in ourselves or others. You will observe, therefore, that, both as regards the philosophy of physics, and the philosophy of mind, all is simply a process of investigation. It is a journey of discovery, in which, in the one case, we commission our senses to examine the qualities of that matter, which is around us, and, in the other, endeavor, by attention to the varieties of our consciousness, to gain a knowledge of those qualities of matter which constitute our susceptibilities of thought and feeling. This explanation is new to me, observed Theon, and I will confess, startling to my imagination. It is pure materialism. You may so call it, rejoined Leontian, but when you have so called it, what then? The question remains, is it true? Or is it false? I should be disposed to say, false, since it confounds all my preconceived notions of truth and error, of right and wrong. Of truth and error, of right and wrong, in the sense of correct or incorrect is, I presume, your meaning, said Leontium. You do not involve moral rectitude or the contrary in a matter of opinion? If the opinion have a moral or immoral tendency, I do, said the youth. A simple matter of fact can have no such tendency or ought not, if we are rational creatures. And would not, if we were always reasoning beings, said Metrodorus, but as the ignorance and superstition which surround our infancy and youth, favor the development of the imagination at the expense of the judgment, we are ever employed in the coining of chimeras, rather than in the discovery of truths, and if ever the poor judgment make an effort to dispel these fancies of the brain, she is repulsed, like a sacrilegious intruder into religious mysteries. Until our opinions are made to rest on facts, said Leontium, the error of our young friend, the most dangerous of all errors, being one of principle and involving many, must ever pervade the world. And it was because I suspected this leading misconception of the very nature, of the very end and aim of the science he is pursuing, that I attempted an explanation of what should be sought, and of what can alone be attained. In philosophy, that is, in knowledge, inquiry is everything. Theory and hypothesis are worse than nothing. Truth is but approved facts. Truth, then, is one with the knowledge of these facts. To shrink from inquiry, is to shrink from knowledge. And to prejudge an opinion as true or false, because it interferes with some preconceived abstraction we call vice or virtue, is as if we were to draw the picture of a man we had never seen, and then, upon seeing him, were to dispute his being the man in question, because unlike our picture. But if this opinion interfered with another, of whose truth we imagined ourselves certain, then clearly, in one or the other, we are mistaken, and the only way to settle the difficulty is to examine and compare the evidences of both. But are there not some truths self-evident? There are a few which we may so call. That is to say, there are some facts, which we admit upon the evidence of a simple sensation, as, for instance, that a whole is greater than its part, that two are more than one, which we receive immediately upon the testimony of our sense of sight or of touch. But are there no moral truths of the same nature? I am not aware of any. Moral truth, resting entirely upon the ascertained consequences of actions, supposes a process of observation and reasoning. What call you, then, a belief in a presiding providence, and a great first cause? A belief resting upon testimony, which belief will be true or false, according to the correctness or incorrectness of that testimony. Is it not rather a self-evident moral truth? In my answer, I shall have to divide your question into two. First, it cannot be a moral truth, since it is not deduced from the consequences of human action. It can be simply a truth, that is, a fact. Secondly, it is not a self-evident truth, since it is not evident to all minds, and frequently becomes less and less evident, the more it is examined. But is not the existence of a first or creating cause demonstrated to our senses by all we see, and hear, and feel? The existence of all that we see and hear and feel is demonstrated to our senses, and the belief we yield to this existence is immediate and irresistible, that is, intuitive. The existence of the creating cause, that you speak of, is not demonstrated to our senses, and therefore the belief in it cannot be immediate and irresistible. I prefer the expression creating to first cause, because it seems to present a more intelligible meaning. When you shall have examined farther into the phenomena of nature, you will see that there can be as little a first as a last cause. But there must be always a cause, producing an effect. Certainly, and so your cause, creating all that we see and hear and feel, must itself have a producing cause, otherwise you are in the same difficulty as before. I suppose it a being unchangeable and eternal, itself unproduced, and producing all things. Unchangeable it may be, eternal it must be, since everything is eternal. Everything eternal? Yes, that is, the elements composing all substances are, so far as we know and can reason, eternal, and in their nature unchangeable, and it is apparently only the different disposition of these eternal and unchangeable atoms that produces all the varieties in the substances constituting the great material whole, of which we form a part. Those particles, whose peculiar agglomeration or arrangement, we call a vegetable today, pass into, and form part of an animal tomorrow, and that animal again, by the falling asunder of its constituent atoms, and the different approximation and agglomeration of the same, or, of the same with other atoms, is transformed into some other substance presenting a new assemblage of qualities. To this simple exposition of the phenomena of nature, which, you will observe, is not explaining their wonders, for that is impossible, but only observing them, we are led by the exercise of our senses. In studying the existences which surround us, it is clearly our business to use our eyes, and not our imaginations. To see things as they are, is all we should attempt, and is all that is possible to be done. Unfortunately, we can do but little even here, as our eyes serve us to see but a very little way. But, were our eyes better, were they so good as to enable us to observe all the arcana of matter, we could never acquire any other knowledge of them, than that they are as they are, and, in knowing this, that is, in seeing every link in the chain of occurrences, we should know all that even an omniscient being could know. One astronomer traces the course of the sun round the earth, another imagines that of the earth round the sun. Some future improvements in science may enable us to ascertain which conjecture is the true one. We shall then have ascertained a fact, which fact may lead to the discovery of other facts, and so on. Until this plain and simple view of the nature of all science be generally received, all the advances we may make in it are comparatively as nothing. Until we occupy ourselves in examining, observing, and ascertaining, and not in explaining, we are idly and childishly employed. With every truth we may discover we shall mix 1,000 errors, and, for one matter of fact, we shall charge our brain with 1,000 fancies. To this leading misconception of the real, and only possible object of philosophical inquiry, I incline to attribute all the modes and forms of human superstition. The vague idea that some mysterious cause not merely precedes but produces the effect we behold, occasions us to wander from the real object in search of an imaginary one. We see the sun rise in the east. Instead of confining our curiosity to the discovery of the time and manner of its rising, and of its course in the heavens, we ask also, why does it rise? What makes it move? The more ignorant immediately conceive some being spurring it through the heavens, with fiery steeds, on wheels of gold, while the more learned tell us of laws of motion, decreed by an almighty fiat, and sustained by an almighty will. Imagine the truth of both suppositions. In the one case, we should see the application of what we call physical power in the driver and the steeds followed by the motion of the sun, and in the other, an almighty volition followed by the motion of the sun. But, in either case, should we understand why the sun moved? Why or how its motion followed what we call the impulse of the propelling power, or the propelling volition? All that we could then know, more than we now know, would be, that the occurrence of the motion of the sun was preceded by another occurrence, and if we afterwards frequently observed the same sequence of occurrences, they would become associated in our mind as necessary precedent and consequent, as cause and effect, and we might give to them the appellation of law of nature, or any other appellation, but they would still constitute merely a truth, that is a fact, and envelope no other mystery, than that involved in every occurrence and every existence. But, according to this doctrine, said Theon, there would be no less reason in attributing the beautiful arrangement of the material world to the motion of a horse, than to the volition of an almighty mind. If I saw the motion of a horse followed by the effect you speak of, I should believe in some relation between them, and if I saw it follow the volition of an almighty mind the same. But the cause would be inadequate to the effect. It could not be so, if it were the cause. For what constitutes the adequacy of which you speak? Clearly only the contact, or immediate proximity of the two occurrences. If any sequence could in fact be more wonderful than another, it should rather seem to be for the consequent to impart grandeur to the precedent, the effect to the cause, than from the cause to impart grandeur to the effect. But in reality all sequences are equally wonderful. That light should follow the appearance of the sun, is just as wonderful, and no more so, as if it were to follow the appearance of any other body, and did light follow the appearance of a black stone it would excite astonishment simply because we never saw light follow such an appearance before. Accustomed, as we now are, to see light when the sun rises, our wonder would be, if we did not see light when he rose, but were light regularly to attend the appearance of any other body, our wonder at such a sequence would, after a time, cease, and we should then say, as we now say, there is a light because such a body has risen, and imagine then, as we imagine now, that we understand why light is. In like manner all existences are equally wonderful. An African lion is in himself nothing more extraordinary than a Grecian horse, although the whole people of Athens will assemble to gaze on the lion, and exclaim how wonderful, while no man observes the horse. True, but this is the wondering of ignorance. I reply, true again, but so is all wondering. If, indeed, we should consider it in this and in all other cases as simply an emotion of pleasurable surprise, acknowledging the presence of a novel object, the feeling is perfectly rational. But if it imagine anything more intrinsically marvelous in the novel existence, than in the familiar one, it is then clearly the idle, that is, the unreasoned and unreflecting marveling of ignorance. There is but one real wonder to the thinking mind, it is the existence of all things, that is the existence of matter. And the only rational ground of this one great wonder is, that the existence of matter is the last link in the chain of cause and effect at which we can arrive. You imagine yet another link, the existence of a power creating that matter. My only objections to this additional link, or superadded cause, are, that it is imagined, and that it leaves the wonder as before, unless, indeed, we should say that it has superadded other wonders, since it supposes a power, or rather, an existence possessing a power, of which we never saw an example. How so? Does not even man possess a species of creating power? And do you not suppose, in your inert matter, that very property which others attribute, with more reason it appears to me, to some superior and unknown existence? By no means. No existence, that we know of, possesses creating power, in the sense you suppose. Neither the existence we call a man, nor any other of the existences comprised under the generic names of matter, physical world, nature, and sea, possesses the power of calling into being its own constituent elements, nor the constituent elements of any other substance. It can change one substance into another substance, by altering the position of its particles, or intermingling them with others, but it cannot call into being, any more than it can annihilate, those particles themselves. The hand of man causes to approach particles of earth and of water, and, by their approximation produces clay, to which clay it gives a regular form, and, by the application of fire, produces the vessel we call a vase. You may say that the hand of man creates the vase, but it does not create the earth, or the water, or the fire, neither has the admixture of these substances added to, or subtracted from, the sum of their elementary atoms. Observe, therefore, there is no analogy between the power inherent in matter, of changing its appearance and qualities, by a simple change in the position of its particles, and that which you attribute to some unseen existence, who by a simple volition, should have called into being matter itself, with all its wonderful properties. An existence possessing such a power I have never seen, and though this says nothing against the possibility of such an existence, it says everything against my belief in it. And farther, the power which you attribute to this existence, that of willing everything out of nothing, being, not only what I have never seen, but that of which I cannot with any distinctness conceive, it must appear to me the greatest of all improbabilities. Our young friend, observed Metrodorus, lately made use of an expression, the error involved in which, seems to be at the root of his difficulty. In speaking of matter, he continued, turning to Theon, you employed the epithet inert. What is your meaning? And what matter do you here designate? All matter surely is, in itself, inert. All matter surely is, in itself, as it is, said Metrodorus with a smile, and that, I should say, is living and active. Again, what is matter? All that is evident to our senses, replied Theon, and which stands opposed to mind. All matter then is inert which is devoid of mind. What then do you understand by mind? I conceive some error in my definition, said Theon, smiling. Should I say, thought, you would ask if every existence devoid of thought was inert, or if every existence, possessing life, possessed thought. I should so have asked. Mind or thought I consider a quality of that matter constituting the existence we call a man, which quality we find in a varying degree in other existences, many, perhaps all animals, possessing it. Life is another quality, or combination of qualities, of matter, inherent in, we know not how many existences. We find it in vegetables, we might perceive it even in stones, could we watch their formation, growth, and decay. We may call that active principle, pervading the elements of all things, which approaches and separates the component particles of the ever-changing, and yet ever-enduring world, life. Until you discover some substance, which undergoes no change, you cannot speak of inert matter. It can only be so, at least, relatively, that is, as compared with other substances. The classing of thought and life among the qualities of matter is new to me. What is in a substance cannot be separate from it. And is not all matter a compound of qualities? Hardness, extension, form, color, motion, rest, take away all these, and where is matter? To conceive of mind independent of matter, is as if we should conceive of color independent of a substance colored. What is form, if not a body of a particular shape? What is thought, if not something which thinks? Destroy the substance, and you destroy its properties, and so equally, destroy the properties, and you destroy the substance. To suppose the possibility of retaining the one, without the other, is an evident absurdity. The error of conceiving a quality in the abstract often offended me in the Lyceum, returned the youth, but I never considered the error as extending to mind and life, any more than to vice and virtue. You stopped short with many others, said Leontium. It is indeed surprising how many acute minds will apply a logical train of reasoning in one case, and invert the process in another exactly similar. To return, and if you will, to conclude our discussion, said Metrodorus, I will observe that no real advances can be made in the philosophy of mind, without a deep scrutiny into the operations of nature, or material existences. Mind being only a quality of matter, the study we call the philosophy of mind, is necessarily only a branch of general physics, or the study of a particular part of the philosophy of matter. I am indebted to your patience, said the youth, and would fain intrude farther on it. I will confine myself at present, however, to one observation. The general view of things, which you present to my mind, the simplicity of which I will confess to be yet more fascinating than its novelty, is evidently unfavorable to religion, and, if so, unfavorable to virtue. An opportunity will, today, be afforded you, said Leontium, of examining this important question in detail. At the request of some of our youth, the master will himself give his views on the subject. I am all curiosity, said Theon. Other teachers have commanded my respect, inflamed my imagination, and, I believe, often controlled my reason. The son of Neocles inspires me with love, and wins me to confidence, by encouraging me to exercise my own judgment, in scanning his arguments, and examining the groundwork of his own opinions. With such a teacher, and in such a school, I feel suspicion to be wholly misplaced, and I shall now start in the road of inquiry, anxious only to discover truth, and willing to part with every erroneous opinion, the moment it shall be proved to be erroneous. Note by the translator. How beautifully have the modern discoveries in chemistry and natural philosophy, and the more accurate analysis of the human mind, sciences unknown to the ancient world, substantiated the leading principles of the Epicurean ethics and physics, the only ancient school of either, really deserving the name. To what have all our ingenious inventions and contrivances for the analysis of material substances led us, but to the atoms of Epicurus? To what, our accurate observation of the decomposition of substances, and the arresting and weighing of their most subtle and invisible elements, but to the eternal and unchangeable nature of those atoms? We have, in the course of our scrutiny, superadded to the wonderful qualities of matter with which he was acquainted, those which we call attraction, repulsion, electricity, magnetism, and see. How do these discoveries multiply and magnify the living powers inherent in the simple elements of all existences, and point our admiration to the sagacity of that intellect which 2000 years ago, started in the true road of inquiry, while, at this day, thousands of teachers, and millions of scholars are stumbling in the paths of error. If we look to our mental philosophy, to what has our scrutiny led, but to the leading principles of Epicurean ethics? In the pleasure, utility, propriety of human action, whatever word we employ, the meaning is the same, in the consequences of human actions, that is, in their tendency to promote our good or our evil. We must ever find the only test of their intrinsic merit or demerit. It might seem strange that, while the truth of the leading principles of the Epicurean philosophy have been long admitted by all sound reasoners, the abuse of the school and of its founder is continued to this day. This might and would seem strange and incomprehensible, did we not, on every subject find the same cowardly fear-effacing, openly and honestly, the prejudices of men. Teachers, aware of the ignorance of those they teach, develop their doctrines in language intelligible only to the few, or, where they hazard a more distinct exposition of truth, shelter themselves from obloquy by echoing the vulgar censure against those who have taught the same truth, with more explicitness, before them. The mass, even of what is called the educated world, know nothing of the principles they decry, or of the characters they abuse. It is easy, therefore, by joining in the abuse against the one, to encourage a belief that we cannot be advocating the other. This desire of standing fair with the wise, without incurring the enmity of the ignorant, may suit with the object of those who acquire knowledge only for its display, or for the gratification of mere curiosity. But they whose nobler aim, and higher gift it is, to advance the human mind in the discovery of truth, must stand proof equally to censure and to praise. That such lips and such pens should employ equivocation, or other artifice, to turn aside the wrath of ignorance, is degrading to themselves and mortifying to their admirers. The late amiable and enlightened teacher, Thomas Browne, of Edinburgh, whose masterly exposition of old and new truths, and exposure of modern as well as ancient errors, has so advanced the science he professed, is yet chargeable with this weakness. After inculcating the leading principles of the Epicurean philosophy, and building upon those principles, the whole of his beautiful system, he condescends to soothe the prejudices which all his arguments have tended to uproot, by passing a sweeping censure on the school, whose doctrines he has borrowed and taught. We might say, how unworthy of such a mind. But we will rather say, how is it to be lamented that such a mind bears not within itself the conviction that all truths are important to all men, and that to employ deception with the ignorant, is to defeat our own purpose, which is, surely, not to open the eyes of those who already see, but to enlighten the blind. Chapter 16. A more than usual crowd attended the instructions of the sage. The gay, and the curious, the learned, and the idle, of all ages, and of either sex, from the restless population of the city, many citizens of note, collected from various parts of Attica, and no inconsiderable portion of strangers from foreign states and countries. They were assembled on the lawn, surrounding the temple already frequently mentioned. The contracting waters of Ilissus flowed nearly in their accustomed bed, and earth and air, refreshed by the storm of the preceding night, resisted the rays of the uncurtained sun, now climbing high in the heavens. A crowd of recollections rushed on the young mind of Theon, as he entered the beautiful enclosure, and gazed on the stream which formed one of its boundaries. His thoughts again played truant to philosophy, and his rapid glance sought another and a fairer form than any it found there, when the approach of Epicurus divided the throng, and hushed the loud murmur of tongues into silence. The sage passed on, and it was not till he ascended the marble steps, and turned to address the assembly, that Theon perceived he had been followed by the beautiful being who ruled his fancy. The hues of Hebe now dyed her lips and her cheeks, but the laughing smiles of the preceding evening were changed for the composure of respectful attention. Her eye caught that of Theon. She gave a blush and a smile of recognition. Then, seating herself at the base of a column to the right of her father, her face resumed its composure, and her full dark eyes fastened on the countenance of the sage, in a gaze of mingled admiration and filial love. Fellow citizens, and fellow men, we purpose, this day, to examine a question of vital importance to humankind, no less a one than the relations we bear to all the existences that surround us, the position we hold in this beautiful material world, the origin, the object, and the end of our being, the source from which we proceed, and the goal to which we tend. This question embraces many. It embraces all most interesting to our curiosity, and influential over our happiness. Its correct or incorrect solution must ever regulate, as it now regulates, our rule of conduct, our conceptions of right and wrong, must start us on the road of true or false inquiry, and either open our minds to such a knowledge of the wonders working in and around us, as our senses and faculties can attain, or close them forever with the bands of superstition, leaving us a prey to fear, the slaves of our ungoverned imaginations, wondering and trembling at every occurrence in nature, and making our own existence and destiny sources of dread and mystery. Ere we come to this important inquiry, it behooves us to see that we come with willing minds, that we say not, so far will we go and no farther, we will make one step, but not two, we will examine, but only so long as the result of our examination shall confirm our preconceived opinions. In our search after truth, we must equally discard presumption and fear. We must come with our eyes and our ears, our hearts and our understandings open, anxious, not to find ourselves right, but to discover what is right, asserting nothing which we cannot prove, believing nothing which we have not examined, and examining all things fearlessly, dispassionately, perseveringly. In our preceding discourses, and, for such as have not attended these, in our writings, we have endeavored to explain the real object of philosophical inquiry. We have directed you to the investigation of nature, to all that you see of existences and occurrences around you, and we have shown that, in these existences and occurrences, all that can be known, and all that there is to be known, lies hid. We have exhorted you to use your eyes, and your judgments, never your imaginations, to abstain from theory, and rest with facts, and to understand that in the accumulation of facts, as regards the nature and properties of substances, the order of occurrences, and the consequences of actions, lies the whole science of philosophy, physical and moral. We have seen, in the course of our inquiry, that in matter itself exist all causes and effects, that the eternal particles, composing all substances, form the first and last links in the chain of occurrences, or of cause and effect, at which we can arrive, that the qualities, inherent in these particles, produce, or are followed by certain effects, that the changes, in position, of these particles, produce or are followed by certain other qualities and effects, that the sun appears, and that light follows his appearance, that we throw a pearl into vinegar, and that the pearl vanishes from our eyes, to assume the form or forms of more subtle, but not less real substances, that the component particles of a human being fall asunder, and that, instead of a man, we find a variety of other substances or existences, presenting new appearances, and new properties or powers, that a burning coal touches our hand, that the sensation of pain follows the contact, that the desire to end this sensation is the next effect in succession, and that the muscular motion of withdrawing the hand, following the desire, is another. That in all this succession of existences and events, there is nothing but what we see, or what we could see, if we had better eyes, that there is no mystery in nature, but that involved in the very existence of all things, and that things being as they are is no more wonderful than it would be if they were different. That an analogous course of events, or chain of causes and effects, takes place in morals as in physics, that is to say, in examining those qualities, of the matter composing our own bodies, which we call mind, we can only trace a train of occurrences, in like manner as we do in the external world, that our sensations, thoughts, and emotions, are simply effects following causes, a series of consecutive phenomena, mutually producing and produced. When we have taken this view of things, observe how all abstruse questions disappear, how all science is simplified, all knowledge rendered easy and familiar to the mind. Once started in this only true road of inquiry, every step we make is one in advance. To whatever science we apply, that is, to whatever part of matter, or to whichever of its qualities, we direct our attention, we shall, in all probability, make important, because true, discoveries. It is the philosophy of nature in general, or any one of those subdivisions of it, which we call the philosophy of mind, ethics, medicine, astronomy, geometry, and see, the moment we occupy ourselves in observing and arranging in order the facts, which are discovered in the course of observation, we acquire positive knowledge, and may safely undertake to develop it to others. The ascertaining the nature of existences, the order of occurrences, and the consequences of human actions constituting, therefore, the whole of knowledge, what is that to prevent each and all of us from extending our discoveries to the full limits prescribed by the nature of our facilities and duration of our existence? What nobler employment can we invent? What pleasure so pure, so little liable to disappointment? What is the to hold us back? What is the not to spur us forward? Does our ignorance start from the very simplicity of knowledge? Do we fear to open our eyes lest we should see the light? Does the very truth we seek alarm us in its attainment? How is it that, placed in this world as on a theatre of observation, surrounded by wonders and endowed with faculties wherewith to scan these wonders, we know so little of what is, and imagine so much of what is not? Other animals, to whom man accounts himself superior, exercise the faculties they possess, trust their testimony, follow the impulses of their nature, and enjoy the happiness of which they are capable. Man alone, the most gifted of all known existences, doubts the evidence of his superior senses, perverts the nature and uses of his multiplied faculties, controls his most innocent, as well as his noblest impulses, and to poison all the sources of his happiness. To what are we to trace this fatal error, this cruel self-martyrdom, this perversion of things from their natural bent? In the overdevelopment of one faculty and neglect of another, we must seek the cause. In the imagination, that source of our most beautiful pleasures when under the control of judgment, we find the source of our worst afflictions. From an early age, I have made the nature and condition of man my study. I have found him in many countries of the earth, under the influence of all varieties of climate and circumstance. I have found him the savage lord of the forest, clothed in the rough skins of animals less rude than himself, sheltered in the crevices of the mountains and caves of the earth from the blasts of winter and heats of the summer sun. I have found him the slave of masters debased as himself, crouching to the foot that spurns him, and showing no signs of miscalled civilization but its sloth and its sensualities. I have found him the lord over millions, clothed in purple and treading courts of marble, the cruel destroyer of his species, marching through blood and rapine, to thrones of extended dominion, the iron-hearted tyrant, feasting on the agonies of his victims, and wringing his treasure from the hard-earned might of industry. I have found him the harmless but ignorant tiller of the soil, eating the simple fruits of his labor, sinking to rest only to rise again to toil, toiling to live and living only to die. I have found him the polished courtier, the accomplished scholar, the gifted artist, the creating genius, the fool and the knave, rich and a beggar, spuming and spurned. Under all these forms and varieties of the external and internal man, still, with hardly an exception, I have found him unhappy. With more capacity for enjoyment than any other creature, I have seen him surpassing the rest of existences only in suffering and crime. Why is this and from whence? A master error, for some there must be, leads to results so fatal, so opposed to the apparent nature and promise of things? Long have I sought this error, this mainspring of human folly and human crime. I have traced, through all their length and train of consequence and causes, human practice and human theory. I have threaded the labyrinth to its dark beginning. I have found the first link in the chain of evil. I have found it, in all countries, among all tribes and tongues and nations. I have found it, fellow men. I have found it in religion. A low murmur here rose from one part of the assembly. A deep and breathless silence succeeded. The sage turned his gaze slowly around, and with a countenance, pure and serene as the skies which shone above him, proceeded. We have named the leading error of the human mind, the bane of human happiness, the perverter of human virtue. It is religion, that dark coinage of trembling ignorance. It is religion, that prisoner of human felicity. It is religion, that blind guide of human reason. It is religion, the dethroner of human virtue, which lies at the root of all the evil and all the misery that pervade the world. Not hastily formed, still less hastily expressed, has been the opinion you hear this day. A long train of reflection led to the discarding of religion as an error, a life of observation to the denouncing it as an evil. In considering it as devoid of truth, I am but one of many. Few have looked deeply and steadily into the nature of things and not called in question belief in existences unseen and causes unknown. But while smiling at the credulity of their fellow beings, philosophers have thought reason good only for themselves. They have argued that religion, however childish a chimera in itself, was useful in its tendencies, that, if it rested upon nothing, it supported all things, that it was the stay of virtue, and the source of happiness. However opposed to every rule in philosophy, physical and moral, however apparently in contradiction to reason and common sense that a thing untrue could be useful, that a belief in facts disproved or unproved could afford a sustaining prop to a just rule of practice, the assertion came supported by so universal a testimony of mankind, and by individual names of such authority in practical wisdom and virtue, that I hesitated to call it mistaken. And as human happiness appeared to me the great desideratum, and its promotion the only object consistent with the views of a teacher of men, I forbore from all expression of opinion, until I had fully substantiated, to my own conviction, both its truth and its tendency. The truth of my opinion is substantiated, as we have seen, by an examination into the nature of things, that is, into the properties of matter, which are alone sufficient to produce all the chances and changes that we behold. Its tendency is discovered by an examination into the moral condition of man. The belief in supernatural existences, and the expectation of a future life, are said to be sources of happiness, and stimuli to virtue. How, and in what way? Is it proved by experience? Look abroad over the earth, everywhere the song of praise, the prayer of supplication, the smoke of incense, the blow of sacrifice, arise from forest, and lawn, from cottage, palace, and temple, to the gods of human idolatry. Religion is spread over the earth. If she be the parent of virtue and happiness, they too should cover the earth. Do they so? Read the annals of human tradition. Go forth and observe the actions of men. Who shall speak of virtue, who of happiness, that hath eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts to feel? No. Experience is against the assertion. The world is full of religion, and full of misery and crime. Can the assertion be sustained by argument, by any train of reasoning whatsoever? Imagine a deity under any fashion of existence. How are our dreams concerning him in an imaginary heaven to affect our happiness or our conduct on a tangible earth? Affect it indeed they may for evil, but how for good? The idea of an unseen being, ever at work around and about us, may afflict the human intellect with idle terrors, but can never guide the human practice to what is rational and consistent with our nature. Grant that, by any possibility, we could ascertain the existence of one God, or of a million of gods, we see them not, we hear them not, we feel them not. Unless they were submitted to our observation, were fashioned like unto us, had similar desires, similar faculties, a similar organization, how could their mode of existence afford a guide for ours? As well should the butterfly take pattern from the lion, or the lion from the eagle, as man from a god. To say nothing of the inconsistency of the attributes, with which all gods are decked, it is enough that none of them are ours. We are men, they are gods. They inhabit other worlds, we inhabit the earth. Let them enjoy their felicity, and let us, my friends, seek ours. But it is not that religion is merely useless, it is mischievous. It is mischievous by its idle terrors, it is mischievous by its false morality, it is mischievous by its hypocrisy, by its fanaticism, by its dogmatism, by its threats, by its hopes, by its promises. Consider it under its mildest and the most amiable form, it is still mischievous, as inspiring false motives of action, as holding the human mind in bondage, and diverting the attention from things useful, to things useless. The essence of religion is fear, as its source is ignorance. In a certain stage of human knowledge, the human mind must of necessity, in its ignorance of the properties of matter, and its dark insight into the chain of phenomena arising out of those properties, must of necessity reason falsely on every occurrence and existence in nature. It must of necessity, in the absence of fact, give the rein to fancy, see a miracle in every uncommon event, and imagine unseen agents as producing all that it beholds. In proportion as the range of our observation is enlarged, and that we learn to connect and arrange the phenomena of nature, we curtail our list of miracles, and the number of our supernatural agents. An eclipse is alarming to the vulgar, as denoting the wrath of offended deities. To the man of science it is a simple occurrence, as easily traced to its cause as any the most familiar to our observation. The knowledge of one generation is the ignorance of the next. Our superstitions decrease as our attainments multiply, and the fervor of our religion declines as we draw nearer to the conclusion which destroys it entirely. That conclusion, based upon accumulated facts, is, as we have seen, that matter alone is at once the thing acting, and the thing acted upon, eternal in duration, infinitely various and varying in appearance, never diminishing in quantity, and always changing in form. Without some knowledge of what is styled natural philosophy, or physics, no individual can attain this conclusion. and in a certain stage of that knowledge, more or less advanced according to the acuteness of the intellect, it will be impossible for any individual, not mentally obtuse, to shun that conclusion. This truth is one of infinite importance. The moment we consider the hostility directed against what is called atheism, as the natural result of deficient information, the mind must be diseased which could resent that hostility. And perhaps a simple statement of the truth would best lead to examination of the subject, and to the conversion of mankind. Imagine this conversion, my friends. Imagine the creature man in the full exercise of all his faculties, not shrinking from knowledge, but eager in its pursuit, not bending the knee of adulation to visionary beings armed by fear for his destruction, but standing erect in calm contemplation of the beautiful face of nature, discarding prejudice, and admitting truth without fear of consequences, acknowledging no judge but reason, no senser but that in his own breast. Thus considered, he is transformed into the god of his present idolatry, or rather into a far nobler being, possessing all the attributes consistent with virtue and reason, and none opposed to either. How great a contrast with his actual state! His best faculties dormant, his judgment unawakened within him, his very senses misemployed, all his energies misdirected, trembling before the coinage of his own idle fancy, seeing over all creation a hand of tyranny extended, and instead of following virtue, worshipping power. Monstrous creation of ignorance! Monstrous degradation of the noblest of known existences! Man, boasting of superior reason, of moral discrimination, imagines a being at once unjust, cruel, and inconsistent, then, kissing the dust, calls himself its slave. This world is, says the theist, therefore it was made. By whom? By a being more powerful than I. Grant this infantine reasoning, what follows as the conclusion? That we must fear him, says the theist. And why? Is his power directed against our happiness? Does your God amuse himself by awakening the terrors of more helpless beings? Fear him then indeed we may, and, let our conduct be what it will, fear him we must. He is good as well as powerful, says the theist, therefore the object of love. How do we ascertain his goodness? I see indeed a beautiful and curious world, but I see it full of moral evils, and presenting many physical imperfections. Is he all-powerful? Perfect good or perfect evil might exist. Is he all-powerful and all-good? Perfect good must exist. Of the sentient beings comprised in the infinity of matter I know but those which I behold. I set no limits to the number of those which I behold not, no bounds to their power. One or many may have given directions to the elementary atoms, and may have fashioned this earth, as the potter fashions its clay. Beings possessing such power may exist, and may have exercised it. All-powerful still they are not, or being so they are wicked, evil exists. I know not what may be, but this my moral sense tells me cannot be, the fashioner of the world I inhabit, in his nature all good and all-powerful. I see yet another impossibility, the fashioner of this world in his nature all good and foreknowing. Granting the possibility of the attributes, their united existence were an impossible supposition in the architect of our earth. Let us accord his goodness the most pleasing and valuable attribute. Your God is then the object of our love, and of our pity. Of our love, because being benevolent in his own nature, he must have intended to produce happiness in forming ours. Of our pity, because we see that he has failed in his intention. I cannot conceive a condition more unfortunate than that of a deity contemplating this world of his creation. Is he the author of some, say, of much happiness? Of what untold misery is he not equally the author? I cannot conceive a being more desperately, more hopelessly wretched than that we have now pictured. The worst of human miseries shrink into comparative insignificancy before those of their author. How must every sigh drawn from the bosom of man rend the heart of his God? How must every violence committed on earth convulse the peace of heaven? Unable to alter what he had fashioned, how must he equally curse his power and his impotence? And in bewailing our existence, how must he burn to annihilate his own? We will now suppose his power without limit, and his knowledge extending to the future, as to the past. How monstrous the conception! What demon drawn from the fevered brain of insanity ever surpassed this deity in malignity? Able to make perfection, he hath sown through all nature the seed of evil. The lion pursues the lamb, the vulture, in his rage, tears the dove from her nest. Man, the universal enemy, triumphs even in the sufferings of his fellow beings, in their pain finds his own joy, in their loss, his gain, in the frenzy of his violence, working out his own destruction, in the folly of his ignorance, cursing his own race, and blessing its cruel author. Your deity is the author of evil, and you call him good, the inventor of misery, and you call him happy. What virtuous mind shall yield homage to such a being? Who shall say that homage, if tendered, degrades not the worshipper? Or, who shall say that homage, when rendered, shall pacify the idle? Will abjectness in the slave ensure mercy in the tyrant? Or, if it should, my friends, which of us would be the abject? Are men found bold to resist earthly oppression, and shall they bow before injustice because she speak from heaven? Does the name of Harmodius inspire our songs? Do crowns of laurel bind the temples of Aristogiton? Let our courage rise higher than theirs, my friends, and, if worthy of ambition, our fame dethrone, not the tyrant of Athens, but the tyrant of the earth, not the oppressor of Athenians but the oppressor of mankind. Stand forth. Stand erect. Say to this God, if you made us in malice, we will not worship you in fear. We will judge of you by your works, and judge your works with our reason. If evil pervade them, you are chargeable with it as their author. We care not to conciliate your injustice, any more than to strive with your power. We judge of the future from the past. And as you have disposed of us in this world, so, if it please you to continue our being, must you dispose of us in another. It would be idle to strive with omnipotence, or to provide against the decrees of omniscience. We will not torment ourselves by imagining your intentions, nor debase ourselves by expostulations. Should you punish, in us, the evil you have made, you will punish it as unjustly as you made it maliciously. Should you reward in us the good, you will reward it absurdly, as it was equally your work, and not ours. Let us now concede in argument the union of all the enumerated attributes. Let us accord the existence of a being perfect in goodness, wisdom, and power, who shall have made all things by his volition, and decreed all occurrences in his wisdom. Such a being must command our admiration and approval. He can command no more. As he is good and wise, he is superior to all praise. As he is great and happy, he is independent of all praise. As he is the author of our happiness, he has ensured our love, but as he is our creator, he may command from us no duties. Supposing a God, all duties rest with him. If he has made us, he is bound to make us happy, and failing in the duty, he must be an object of just abhorrence to all his sentient creation. Kindness received must necessarily inspire affection. This kindness, in a divine creator, as in an earthly parent, is a solemn duty, a sacred obligation, the non-performance of which were the most atrocious of crimes. When performed, love from the creature, as from the child, is a necessary consequence, and an all-sufficient reward. Allowing then to the theist his God, we stand to him in no relation that can inspire fear, or involve duty. He can give us no happiness that he was not bound to bestow, He can cherish us with no tenderness, that he was not bound to yield. It is for him to gratify all our desires, or, if they be erroneous, to correct them. It is for us to demand every good in his power to grant, or in ours to enjoy. Let then, the theologist banish fear and duty from his creed. It is love, love alone that can be claimed by gods or yielded by men. Have we said enough? Surely the absurdity of all the doctrines of religion, and the iniquity of many, are sufficiently evident. To fear a being on account of his power, is degrading; to fear him if he be good, ridiculous. Prove to us his existence, and prove to us his perfections, prove to us his parental care. Love springs up in our bosoms, and repays his bounty. If he care not to show us his existence, he desires not the payment of our love, and finds in the contemplation of his own works their reward. But, says the theist, his existence is evident, and not to acknowledge it a crime. It is not so to me, my friends. I see no sufficient evidence of his existence, and to reason of its possibility, I hold to be an idle speculation. To doubt that which is evident is not in our power. To believe that which is not evident, is equally impossible to us. Theist, thou makest of thy God a being more weak, more silly, than thyself. He punisheth as a crime the doubt of his existence. Why, then, let him declare his existence, and we doubt no more. Should the wandering tribes of Scythia doubt the existence of Epicurus, should Epicurus be angry? What vanity, what absurdity, what silliness, O theists! Do ye not suppose in your God? Let him exist, this God, in all the perfection of a poet's imagery. I lift to him a forehead assured and serene. I see thee, O God, in thy power, and admire thee. I see thee in thy goodness, and approve thee. Such homage only is worthy of thee to receive, or of me to render. And what does he reply? Thou art right, creature of my fashioning. Thou canst not add to, nor take away from the sum of my felicity. I made thee to enjoy thy own, not to wonder at mine. I have placed thee amid objects of desire, I have given thee means of enjoyment. Enjoy, then. Be happy. It was for that I made thee. Hearken, then, my children. Hearken to your teacher. Let it be a god or a philosopher who speaks, the injunction is the same, enjoy, and be happy. Is life short? It is an evil, but render life happy, its shortness is the only evil. I call to you, as, if he exist, God must call to you from heaven, enjoy, and be happy. Do you doubt the way? Let Epicurus be your guide. The source of every enjoyment is within yourselves. Good and evil lie before you. The good is, all which can yield you pleasure. The evil, what must bring you pain. Here is no paradox, no dark saying, no moral hidden tables. We have considered the unsound fabric of religion. It remains to consider that, equally unsound, of morals. The virtue of man is false as his faith. What folly invented, knavery supports. Let us arise in our strength, examine, judge, and be free. The teacher here paused. The crowd stood, as if yet listening. At a convenient season, my children, we will examine farther into the nature of man, and the science of life. Finis.